Welcome to the Good Growing Podcast. I am Chris Enroth, horticulture educator with University of Illinois Extension, coming at you from Macomb, Illinois, and we have got a great show for you today. Soil test results. We are going to dive into what happens when you get that report back and you have all these numbers staring at you in the face. Well, you know I'm not doing this by myself. We are joined, as always, every single week by horticulture educator Ken Johnson in Jacksonville. Hey, Ken.
Hello, Chris. There's definitely a lot of numbers on these tests. So if you get an analysis with them, it makes a lot more sense.
It really does. You know, if you could have someone from the soil lab just sort of hold your hand through the whole process here, that would be great. But that doesn't always happen. You know, we do get questions into the office, people saying, I've got this soil test report they sent to me, and there's not much information on here, or, you know, what do I need to know? What's the important things about this? So we have our soil test reports that we have taken that we're going to share with everyone today.
Maybe we should, before we get into the meat of the presentation, or it's not a presentation, the podcast today, we should do a recap on how to take a soil test. So if you're inspired after listening to this, you know how to go about doing it.
You should be inspired after listening to this, because every time I am doing a class in person, and you know, the whole little topic of soil testing comes up, I always like surveying the crowd to see like who's taken a soil test. And it is very infrequent, rare, not common for anyone to raise their hand and say, oh yeah, I've taken a soil test. But a lot of these people have been gardening, you know, a long time. So it's interesting. So how about you, Ken? When you're doing presentations, do you ever survey the crowd to see who's done a soil test?
Yep, and similar results to you. And I mean, we're doing a growing great vegetables class right now, and we did that poll, and I forgot to save the results, but I think it was 70+% of the people had not done one before. So yes, it is usually, commonly overlooked or not done. I would say, fortunately though, in Illinois, get myself in trouble for saying this. I don't think in most of our soils in Illinois, it's not as big of a deal as in other places in the world or in the U.S. But it's still a good idea to do it because that can help alleviate some problems you may be having, or allow you to address some problems you may potentially have.
That is true. Yeah, and many times, you know, I would say you and we deal with folks that are having problems in their landscape. I bet the vast majority of folks, they don't contact us because things are going all right with their soil, or they don't have that need. But a lot of times it seems like, you know, clients that we help, and the soil test would be useful to know what might be causing these issues with their plants, or why are you not getting as good of a yield off of your tomato plants this year? Before we do that, Ken, the way that I took my soil sampling, and we can link to our soils webpage. It's Illinois Extension .edu. Sorry, it's extension.illinois.edu/soil. And on that webpage, it describes how to take a soil test. And for me, just following the instructions on that webpage, it is a lot about randomization. It is you don't necessarily want to have a good strategy for collecting your soil samples other than it being random, and maybe separating it by your growing areas. If you have a lawn, you would treat that differently than like a perennial or a shrub bed, which would be treated differently than a vegetable garden. And the soil labs, they are going to tailor the recommendations differently based upon what is being grown in that spot. And that's something to be mindful of. But if you really just want a general knowledge of what's happening in your soil, you would take anywhere from 6 to maybe 10 random samples throughout your yard and mix those all together in a plastic bucket. And you would then take a couple cups, maybe 2 cups worth, into a plastic baggie, and you would send that off to the soil lab. Now, that sounds easy, but Ken, is there any how deep down do we go? You know, like what's a good strategy for collecting these subsamples?
Yeah. So again, the depth is going to vary depending on what you're sampling for. So like in your lawn, recommendation usually what 3 to 4 inches down that you would dig. Vegetable gardens usually 5 to 8 inches deep, and then if you're doing trees or shrubs, things are to be rooted a little more deeply, 10, 12 inches deep is typically what the recommendation would be for how deep you're digging in. Basically you're digging a hole, you take a slice off the side of that and put that in your bucket or whatever and mix those together. So you don't necessarily need a tremendous amount from these, but if you're digging 10 holes that are 10 to 12 inches deep, it's going to take you a little bit of time, unless you've got one of the fancy soil probe thingies, which will speed up the process.
Which I do have, and those really do speed up that process. And so really it's just a cylindrical probe. It's hollow in the middle, but it's sharp on the bottom. And so you just, it won't work in dry soil. So you have to, after a rain or something, this helps to use this. You push this into the soil, and the probe has markings on the side to see which depth you're at. And then you take it and you twist it and you pop that core right out. Makes it really easy. Now, again, probably a homeowner is not going to have this because you're not going to be taking soil samples as regularly as like a farmer, fruit vegetable grower, a landscaper might be. And so, yeah, again, you'd probably just use like a shovel, dig a V-shaped hole, and then slice off the edge of that hole with your shovel or your trowel or something. And you're basically just trying to replicate that little core that we would be getting with that probe. So, yeah, as Ken said, you don't need that much, but it has to be scattered throughout the yard, and then we mix it all together.
And you want to take out any plant debris, get out roots and stuff, so that doesn't affect the levels that they're getting returned to you. And as you're digging, say you're in a vegetable garden and you notice there's like big differences in what the soil is like the texture, the color, that may be worthwhile separating that area out from the rest and testing that separately, because if you've got big differences in texture and color, there's probably going to be varying nutrient levels and pH potentially in there. So you may need to treat that separately from kind of what the rest of the stuff is like.
Yeah. And if folks have more questions about how to collect those soil samples, we do have a video or two that we can link you in the show description about that just demonstrates how to do that. And then, Ken, the question I usually get following that, description of how to do it is, well, where do I send it? So what do we recommend to folks in terms of what to do with it? Should they just go to a garden center and buy one of those home test kits?
Yes, that is what. Yeah, question you get a lot is which test kit should I buy from the garden center, the hardware store? And while you can do those are not going to be nearly as accurate as sending it off to a lab. And sending it off to a lab isn't going to be that much more expensive than the home kits. So I think our recommendation, even if we weren't working for extension, but extension recommendation would be to send that off to a soil testing lab. And unfortunately, University of Illinois does not have its own soil testing lab. A lot of land-grant universities do, but Illinois does not. So again, on that soils website, that will be down in the show notes, we do have a link, some links to lab or lists of labs that will conduct soil analysis for you. And when you send that off, make sure you indicate that you are doing this in a vegetable garden. Otherwise, which we will see in a little bit, you'll get recommendations for corn and beans if the lab is in Illinois or the Midwest, more than likely.
That is correct, because most of the soil tests they get are from, agronomic fields, grain farmers, corn, soybean farmers. Like that is the majority of tests that they are processing in those labs. The other thing suggested is maybe give like 3 or 4 labs a call see how much they charge for a soil test. I will say for my soil test, it cost me $17 for just a basic garden soil lab test, and include about $10 shipping and handling. And it wasn't that expensive, $27, $30 with tax. And then you're probably not spending much more, as Ken said, than one of those kits that you would pick up at the garden center. So call a couple labs, see what they might charge, see how they want you to collect those samples, if they have any special instructions at all. And then, sometimes if they might have you create an online account, those can be pretty handy, because in the past, a lot of soil labs, they would just mail you a paper report, which then you immediately lose. You might misplace, or it just goes and winds up in the trash. But now with our modern day web-based kind of that sales point of sale for these soil labs, you have an account, which means your reports are saved in your account, and you can track that over time, which I think is pretty handy in some cases. So yeah, if you find something like that useful, call the lab, see if that's a service that they might offer.
Yeah, and depending on where you're at, you may be able to drop them off at the lab, so you'd save on that.
Yes.
The shipping. Like here by us in Jacksonville, we've got a lab. They have a drop box relatively close to Jacksonville, so you can just drive over there if you wanted to.
And that brings up a good point, though. So let's say we call a lab down in Florida. It's a lot cheaper than getting your soil tested than a lab here in Illinois. Should we be sending our samples out of region, perhaps? There might be an issue with that?
Dig back into the mind here. Remember some Phil's classes. So there are different tests that you do to extract the nutrients. So there's like Bray and Malick and all kinds of different other ones. And those tests, some of them are going to be better for different parts of the country than others. So like in Florida, they use a different type. Those labs down there, at least the soil lab at University of Florida, is going to use a different extraction technique than we would in the Midwest, because the soils are much different down there. So I would probably shoot for stuff in the Midwest.
Yeah. And I think if you're curious, it looks like the Bray soil test for something like phosphorus is what we typically might see here in the Midwest. That's because Bray tends to work better for more acidic soils, anything below like 7.2 pH. And so if you do get your soil test report, you're in the Midwest, you use the Midwest lab, and it says something other than Bray under like your phosphorus reading, then you might want to call the lab and maybe ask them, like, can you, because it can be converted. So can you like convert this? Or a lot of times the labs will hold your samples for like 30 days afterwards. And that might require retesting. So just give them a call if you have questions about the particular type of test. But usually, not all the time, but usually you're going to see like the Bray test for your phosphorus. And so, yeah, just because it's soil acidity based.
Should we show our results now?
I guess that's probably a good idea.
Sure.
Yes. So we apologize ahead of time for anyone who might just be listening to this podcast. We are going to start. We're going to show the actual report from the soil labs that we did receive. We will, of course, we'll be describing numbers. There's no visual thing really to know, but just keep in mind, I don't think you'll be missing much. But if you want to check it out, we will have a YouTube link in the show notes as well.
You want me to go first? Example of somewhat what not to do.
Ken's is weird, but yes, go ahead, Ken.
All right. So this is a soil test we did actually at our Lukeman garden site a couple of years ago. I think the soil testing video that we show on the extension website, I think this is actually the soil we took from that. So this is a few years old, but so for this one, all I have is a text file and an Excel file. So this is much easier to read than those others. But here you can see we got soil tests. We just had one sample that we sent in because the soil there is pretty uniform, or at least the area where we were going to be planting in where we tested look pretty similar. So we've got soil pH, buffer pH, P1 would be our phosphorus, K is our potassium, Ca, calcium, Mg, magnesium. We have OM%, so that's organic matter percent. We have cation exchange capacity, and we have base saturation are the ones that were given on this. So our soil pH is 6.6. Buffer pH is 7.0. So basically, the buffer pH is going to kind of give you an indication of how difficult's the right term, but how easy it's going to be to adjust the pH of that soil, how resistant that soil is to resist to changing pH. So for ours, it's not bad. And we don't need to raise our pH, so it's not really an issue, because ideally we're growing in something around 6 to 7 for the pH for garden soil. So we're fine there. Our phosphorus, we have 83 pounds per acre, which I think is a little on the high side for that one. Potassium is 451 pounds per acre, which is also on the high side. Calcium, 5,295 pounds per acre, again, high. Magnesium, 862, again, on the higher end. And this side, we had not grown in this side at all. It had been grass and pasture for a long time. So there's really not a whole lot of inputs or management that we were aware of for the last several years going into this. Organic matter, we've got 3.5%. Typically, I think we would want somewhere to 3-5% range is typically what we're looking for in like a vegetable garden situation. So we're fine there. Cation exchange capacity is good as basically how available nutrients are to plants and stuff. And then so the base saturation is kind of the percentage of the soil's cation exchange capacity that's taken up by the different elements or nutrients there. So kind of for calcium, the ideal range is 60 to 80%. So we're good on that one on the soil test that we have. The magnesium, 10 to 20%. So again, we're good on the higher end of good, but we're still kind of within that ideal ratio there, percentage there. Potassium, 2 to 6%. So again, we're good there. Hydrogen should be less than 30%. So, while our nutrients levels may be a little high, we're good. We don't really need to add anything. And then for recommendations, we've got recommendations, and this is pounds per acre. Because we did not indicate or forgot to indicate that this is for a vegetable garden, we have recommendations for how to grow corn, beans, or grains and legumes. So 100 bushel corn, 30 bushel bean recommendations here. So if we were trying to grow corn, recommendation would be 121 pounds of nitrogen, 19 pounds phosphorus, 12 pounds of potassium on that. So since we're not trying to grow corn, we have not really fertilized any of this stuff out there, and our yields have been just fine. We don't have any deficiencies. Our tomatoes still put on an ungodly amount of tomatoes and stuff. So, this is, I don't know how indicative this is of Illinois, but I don't think this would be too uncommon for an area where you haven't really grown a whole lot in. We've got good nutrient levels and stuff, and we don't really need to add fertilizers, maybe a little nitrogen. But other than that, we haven't needed to and don't really need to add anything. Now we need to go back and probably retest after this growing season to see what our levels are like, but we haven't seen any indication of any kind of drop off on our yields or anything like that.
Yeah, I was going to say this looks like an Illinois soil, like high nutrients, pretty good organic matter content, good CEC. Like you got everything going for you here, Ken, at the Lukeman Gardens. So this looks great, despite the fact they gave you recommendations for growing 100 bushel per acre corn. But I think it looks great. Yeah, you don't even need to add any lime. Everything is spot on right here.
So one of the many advantages of Illinois is we got good soil.
Yes. So you shared your soil report. Time to see this one. All right. So this soil test report that I am showing you, this comes from my backyard. I took samples from the lawn where I was located. It was pretty much adjacent to several landscape beds. I kind of wanted to also do separate samples for the landscape beds that were mulched, but actually I put my probe down there Some of that soil's still frozen. So goes to show mulch is a great insulator, both in keeping soil warmer and colder. So I still had a little bit of ice down there, so I was not able to get this sampled. But so this soil report, we're just going to take you through this. We did use a different company than what Ken had used, so my report's going to look a little bit different. But it will tell you when they received it. They got my sample on March 6th. They completed the sampling on March 10th. So great turnaround time. I did name the sample Home 1 after Admiral Akbar's ship from the movie Star Wars, The Jedi Strikes Back. So no, not The Jedi Strikes. That's the Empire. The Return of the Jedi. I can't even get my movies right. My goodness.
It's a trap.
Ken said you failed. Return of the Jedi. Okay. Home 1. So this is a 3-page report. This first page is going to go through a lot of the numbers that Ken had just described, where we're just looking at these different readings that they got from their test report. Our organic matter here, very much in line with what Ken had. In my yard, it is 3.3%. And in this case, yes, we are pretty much right where we would want to be for our organic matter content. And then it goes into our phosphorus readings. Looking at it says Bray test here. We have a weak Bray, strong Bray, and so I'm in parts per million for my report, whereas Ken was in pounds per acre for nutrients. So units can be different here. So for Ken, pounds per acre, the ideal range is 20 to 40 pounds, but for me in parts per million of phosphorus, I am looking anywhere from 10 to 20 parts per million for my weak Bray. And as you can see, I'm at 29 parts per million, which the lab, this H right here indicates high. And so I know that I have an excessive amount of phosphorus. We move on here to potassium. I am at 179 parts per million, which for Ken, again, for his pounds per acre, that kind of max threshold is 250 pounds per acre of potassium. For parts per million, it is 125. So I am, the lab indicates I am very high. I'm VH on this one. And then we get to magnesium, just sort of this speed this up here, 342 parts per million, also indicated as very high. And my calcium here is indicated at 1,306, which this is rated as low. So this is something that maybe we'll keep an eye on. We'll see what the soil test then recommends here in the next few pages. Sodium levels, 37, which I guess if we also, that's measures your sodium, but we also look at some of our salts. My salts, if I jump down to the bottom right-hand corner of this table here, is measured in, I want to say it's like, I don't know what this I don't know what this is, but it's measuring electrical conductivity, but it's like micromoles or something. But what we're looking at, I have a reading of 0.4, which they list as a low soluble salts, because you don't want very salty soils. That can be bad for your plants. So 0.4 is considered low. If you go over 0.5, you get to medium. 1.26, you have high. Anything pretty much over 1.75, you got some salty soils there. You might be able to sprinkle that on your French fries. All right, so jumping back up here to this top line, very interesting. For an Illinois soil, my soil pH is 5.5. That's pretty acidic, even for Illinois standards. So maybe this can explain some of this. I also have some blueberry bushes that I got from a friend, and he had described how they sort of struggled in his yard, but they've really done pretty well in my yard. And this might be why. Blueberries like an acidic soil of like 4.8. and I have a soil pH of 5.5. And my buffer index, and as Ken described that as it's kind of that resistance to change, it's not at a 7. It's not at a neutral. It is also kind of low. And the lower it is, the harder it is. The more it will resist changing to be more alkaline, to go up. So I don't think it's that big of a. I don't think my buffer index is going to be an issue here. But I don't know. I've never really had to play with soil pH. It's always just been in the 6s, and I've been okay with it. As far as my cat, go ahead.
Just turn your lawn into a blueberry patch, and
I told my wife that I'm like, maybe we should just go buy a bunch of azaleas, rhododendrons, because they also like an acidic soil. We're just gonna have to pick acid-loving plants, and I'm fine with that. So my cation exchange capacity, or CEC, is a little bit lower than Ken's was, but not bad. It's at 13.5. And looking at our extension website, when we kind of give a recommendation for CEC, what is best for a garden setting, we're looking at anywhere from like 15 to 20 CEC, that range right there. You get over 20, once we get to like 25, we get into like heavy clay, like a clay pan soil, like a pure organic soil, or a muck type soil. And that clay, why is a heavy clay soil have such a high CEC? Well, because clay particles are so small, but they're plate-like, and they stack on top of each other. And this means that there's a lot more surface area for them to hold on to nutrients. And so clay, even though I know people don't like it, we all complain about our clay soil, clay does play an important role in nutrient holding capacity for our soils. And so that is just something to be mindful of. Thank your clayey soils every once in a while for the nutrients that they hold. And then, of course, my base saturation, looks fairly decent. Ken, I forget the ranges that you had mentioned earlier, but I might have a few that are a little too high. And I don't know if my potassium is right or not, or my sodium, if that's still in line with the base saturation levels that you had referenced earlier. But everything looks to be on the up and up.
Yeah, so your calcium 60 to 80, magnesium 10 to 20, potassium 2 to 6, hydrogen less than 30.
Okay. I think we're looking good. This lab also did test the nitrates in the soil. This can be a tough one to analyze for soil labs, because nitrogen is not a very permanent thing. It fluctuates in the soils. It goes from nitrate to nitrite. Our atmosphere is chocked full of nitrogen. When plants are growing like crazy in like June, they're using a ton of nitrogen. So are the microorganisms in the soil. So nitrogen, it changes. It can also leach through the soil and can go away. So it's very difficult to get an accurate measurement of nitrogen in your soil. So very often I skip this on a soil test. I don't really pay much attention to the nitrogen readings here, because the lab knows this too. And very often when you get a lab report, they're going to give you nitrogen recommendations regardless of what this might say, because depending on what crop you're growing, there is research based upon how much nitrogen those crops use. And then they just give those recommendations like, we assume this crop is going to use this much nitrogen throughout the year, and this is how much nitrogen you'll need to apply to your soil. So just something to be mindful of. Maybe talk to your soil lab about those nitrogen numbers, but I typically ignore them. Do you ignore nitrogen numbers, Ken, on soil reports?
Yeah, I'm not sure how many I've seen actually have it on there. That may just be the lab. I don't know, a lot of people use around here doesn't do it. So
yes. And the home test kits definitely don't give you an accurate reading just on nitrogen. So just be mindful of that. All right. Our second page here, this is just a basic recommendations page. So really they're splitting the first page of what they analyze. The second page are recommendations. So we'll show that here for you right now, but I want to quickly flip to the third page, which has everything's summarized. And I think this is a much easier way of looking at this information. Yes, you can go back up to that first page. You can look at all those numbers and look up the ranges that are ideal. But here, hey, they've got a chart of each thing, and it has, it's like a bar graph, and it says low, medium, optimum, or very high. And each of our nutrients is listed here, and they all have their own corresponding bar where it falls on the idea on the scale here of, do we have enough? Do we have too much? Do we have too little? So I think this is very visually more appealing to me. So again, in terms of what we just talked about on that first page, everything looks to be optimum in terms of our organic matter, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium. Everything is looking very good on here. Calcium is a little bit low. Salts are good. CEC, good for what we're using it. pH, a little low, a little bit low. On the other right side of the screen here, they give us suggestions for what to do for your lawn. So as I said, this is sampled from a lawn. This is going to remain lawn. And so I made sure to specify I want recommendations for turf grass. And they're going to give, the handy thing here is that they give this in 100 square feet, 1,000 square feet, or an acre. So probably most of us are going to be dealing, if you're in a vegetable garden, probably by 100 square feet. If you're in like a lawn or landscape, probably by 1,000 square feet. So per 1,000 square feet, I need to add about 2.87 pounds of nitrogen. Now that needs to be split up so that I only apply 1 pound of nitrogen per application per 1,000 square feet. So this is probably like 2.5-ish fertilizer applications for the lawn. And they still do recommend adding phosphorus, which I'm already at optimum. I'm going to skip that because phosphorus, it binds to soil and it doesn't go away unless it erodes through soil erosion. So I don't want to risk building up my phosphorus levels too high, because I've seen that in a few soil reports where over decades, folks have been putting 10-10-10 on their lawns, the 10-10-10 being nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. That middle number, P, phosphorus, they were getting issues with their woody plants turning chlorotic. And I suggested doing a soil test. When that soil test came back, the phosphorus was literally, the bar chart was off the chart. It was higher than what the chart could measure. And doing a little bit of reading, when you have excessive amounts of phosphorus, you can actually block the uptake of metal ions to our plants, our woody plants being the first susceptible ones to that. And that's what they were seeing with that chlorosis. The plants weren't able to take up the iron and zinc and all the other metals that they're required to use as micronutrients. And then potassium, again, I'm at optimum. So I'm just going to ignore this phosphorus and potassium. I'll probably do one fertilizer application, and then I'll return my clippings back to the lawn, which is equivalent to another fertilizer application. If you return those clippings throughout the year, it's like adding 1 pound of nitrogen back to your lawn. And then all the way down here, we have our lime. And I don't know, Ken, I'm debating whether or not I need to lime this or just embrace the acidic nature of my soil. But I can add about 5 pounds, 6.2 is what they have here. But you can go get like lime in like 5-pound bags, 25-pound bags, 50, 100-pound bags. But, you know, you could go put down a 5-pound bag of lime in 100 square feet and call it a day. I don't think I'm going to bother, though.
Sounds like a good experiment. Do some and not others. See what happens.
Maybe I should do that because, yeah, the lawn does struggle. I always blame my dogs and kids, though. But I could try to put some lime down in a 100 square foot area, mark that, and see if it does any different. It's a good idea. Well, that was a lot of great information about soil test reports. If you have questions about your soil test reports, it is important to know a lot of times the labs will have like an agronomist or someone who can help you interpret these. If not, please feel free. You can reach out to your local extension office. We're always happy to also look at those reports with you and maybe help guide you into what are some recommendations, possibilities. Well, the Good Growing Podcast is a production of University of Illinois Extension, edited this week by me, Chris Enroth. A special thanks, Ken. Thank you for sharing your Lukeman garden soil test and hanging out with me today to chat all things soil.
Yes, thank you. And I am gonna do one this year for our home garden. I know I keep saying that, but this will be the year. And I look forward to the results of your experiment with lime.
Ooh, me too. We'll see how this goes. I already know. I've already scouted out where to get the little 5-pound bag of lime at the farm store. So I'll go buy that. We'll flag out a spot. I'll take some pictures. Maybe we can share it on this podcast next year.
Excellent. And let's do this again next week.
Oh, we shall do this again next week. It's getting hot outside. I'm going to have to trade out the winter clothes for the spring clothes. And guess what else is popping up out there? Spring ephemerals, the flowers that are there and then gone. So we're going to talk about those spring ephemerals next week. Well, listeners, thank you for doing what you do best, and that is listening. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, watching. And as always, keep on growing. We're going to go right into those details, but you know I'm not doing this by myself. I am joined, as always, every single week by Horticulture. Sorry, Ken. And guess what's else? And guess what's else? I can't say it. And guess what else?